Okay, great. Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Lauren Tice. I'm the Director of Education at Raritan Headwaters. Thank you for joining us today. Our river-friendly webinar for today is Groundwater Protection and Well Stewardship. Next week, we have a fun webinar coming up about green cleaning, so hopefully we'll get to see you there. And we will have more webinars to come later in the summer, and in the fall, we're going to take a short break for the summer, but stay tuned for some upcoming webinars after summer break. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of the River Friendly program before turning it over to Mara. So for those of you that are not familiar, the River Friendly program is a free non-regulatory certification program. This is for organizations and individuals, and the three partners that run the program are Raritan Headwaters, the Watershed Institute, and New Jersey Water Supply Authority. And we offer technical assistance to businesses, golf courses, schools, individuals, and now community partners to help them protect water resources, to protect the watershed, and practice good environmental stewardship. Community partners, for those that don't know, is a new program which helps entities that don't fall into the other four categories participate in the program. So there's really something for everyone. Let's see. So the map over here on the right shows the area where our three partners primarily work, which is the Raritan Basin. But there are organizations that carry out parts of the River Friendly program elsewhere. So you can check out our website, which is njriverfriendly.org, for all sorts of information, no matter what sort of organization or entity you are. You can find out who is your River Friendly representative, which organization it is that you should contact for more information. Everyone here is an individual, so I recommend that everyone fill out the River Friendly resident checklist, which is available at njriverfriendly.org, and you will get a really cool sign to show off to your neighbors. Actually, attending this webinar is one of something that'll get you points as a River Friendly resident, so you're already on your way. This webinar, as well as our past webinars, this webinar is being recorded. Everybody knows, so you can turn off your video now if you want. But the recording will be available on the resources tab of the NJ River Friendly website. So this is what it looks like here. There's all sorts of other information in addition to the recording, so definitely check it out if you're interested in anything we've covered up until now. Just a little bit of WebEx for those of you that are not familiar, though we've all been using these platforms a lot lately. If you're having some issues with your connection and with the audio, you can look to the bottom of your screen and there is a circle with 3 dots. If you hover over it, you'll see an option for audio selection where you can then type in your phone number and WebEx will actually call you. So then you can hear the webinar over your phone if you're having issues. If you have any questions, our presenter down the bottom, you will also see a little chat icon. So you can type in your questions there and we will field all questions at the end of the presentation. So just type them in there and hold tight and we'll get your questions answered for you. If everyone can please mute your microphone, you'll probably already be muted. I think when you enter the meeting, your microphone is automatically muted, but just make sure if you don't mind so we can reduce any background noise and we can all hear our presenter very clearly. And I think that's just about all to say about WebEx. So just a little intro about our presenter is Mara Tippett from Raritan Headwaters. She is Raritan Headwaters watershed scientist focusing in groundwater resources. She also manages our well test office in the South Branch. So if you've gotten your well tested, you might recognize her, but she is a wealth of information. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mara.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for that excellent introduction. I'm going to share my screen here with everyone. Okay, I think I did that successfully. Can everyone see my my slides? Terrific. So I am very excited to have an opportunity to discuss groundwater today and to give our aquifers a moment in the sun, because being river friendly also means being aquifer friendly. So just really briefly, a little bit about Raritan Headwaters if you're not familiar with us. We're a nonprofit watershed conservation organization, and through science and stewardship, including our stream monitoring and well testing programs, annual watershed-wide stream cleanup, education and advocacy, we protect the water in our rivers and streams as well as in our homes. And I encourage you to check out our website for lots of new educational content and resources that we've been developing while working from home largely over the last couple of months. And I'm sharing these two images of our offices. Many people don't realize that we actually have two offices. Our headquarters up in Bedminster on the left there, that's our North Branch office. And then we also have an office here on Main Street in Flemington. And this is where I'm speaking to you from now, and the location of our well testing program office. So I have a lot to talk about today, maybe even too much, we'll see. The first half of this presentation or so will be an overview of groundwater resources and a little bit about conservation. And then I'll talk more specifically about private or domestic residential wells, which serve about 13% of New Jersey's population. So just some basics about groundwater. It is the largest source of usable fresh water in the world. 98% of Earth's available fresh water is groundwater. We rely on it every day. It's the water we drink, the water that grows our food, the water that helps recharge our lakes and our rivers. It can be found pretty much everywhere on Earth, beneath hills and mountains and plains and even deserts. Groundwater is all of the water found underground in the cracks and spaces in the soil, sand, and rock, and the saturated zone below the water table. So technically groundwater is only that water that's below the water table. And the groundwater supply is replenished by rain and snowmelt that seeps down into the cracks and crevices beneath the land surface. And this is called groundwater recharge. And about a quarter of all the US rainfall becomes groundwater. Of course, this is reduced if there's a lot of impervious cover, which prevents the water from seeping into the ground. But the rest of the water that's not, doesn't become groundwater is either evaporated or transpired or flows into surface water. And under natural conditions, groundwater moves along flow paths from areas of recharge to areas of discharge at springs or along streams and lakes and wetlands. Discharge also occurs as seepage to bays or the ocean in coastal areas. And groundwater moves really slowly. A velocity of 1 foot per day or greater is actually a high rate of movement for groundwater. And groundwater velocities can be as low as 1 foot per year or 1 foot per decade, depending on the composition of the soils. And water moves much more slowly through clay than sand, which is much more porous and permeable. So aquifers are the geologic formations where groundwater is stored. Here's a map of New Jersey aquifers. There's a lot to explore here, so I'm just going to point out that in bedrock aquifers, like those in the Piedmont and Highlands regions here in northern and central New Jersey, water is transmitted through large connected rock fractures. I have a little illustration here. And in the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer system in the coastal plain, which if I go back, you see the large tan area at the bottom of the state, the bottom half of the state. The Kirkwood-Cohansey under the Pine Barrens there covers approximately 3,000 square miles, and the Cohansey Formation consists mostly of sand, and the Kirkwood Formation below contains both silt and clay. So in here, the water is stored in spaces within the sediment called pores. That's just a basic overview of aquifers, but I do encourage you to explore this map further. It's really interesting. It gives you lots of information. So groundwater keeps our streams flowing largely, especially when there's no precipitation or snowmelt. Base flow is the dry weather flow in a stream or river, which results from groundwater seeping into riverbanks or the riverbed. And if the flow is significant enough, the stream can flow year-round, and these are called perennial or permanent streams. Without base flow recharge from groundwater, many rivers would not carry a flow of water except during storms. Streams that flow only periodically in response to rains are known as ephemeral or intermittent streams. About 40% of all flow in U.S. rivers and streams originates as groundwater, but in the upper Raritan, it's actually closer to 80%. So the trout streams that flow year-round with cool, clear water virtually all result from constant input from groundwater. Water flowing into a stream from groundwater is called a gaining stream. And this is the most common occurrence. However, there are also losing streams that kind of leak water from their channel into the ground beneath. In a gaining stream, the groundwater level is higher than the water level in the channel. And in a losing stream, on the right there, the groundwater level is below the stream level. If the stream overtops its banks, say in a storm, to spread out over a floodplain, the floodwater infiltrates to the groundwater underneath, and this can help reduce the impacts of flooding in downstream areas. And then after the storm, there's a slow release of that water that maintains the base flow in the channel. So maintaining these floodplains and riparian buffers are really important to consider in development planning and also in climate change adaptation planning. Besides worsening floods and droughts, if we lose wetlands, it also allows large quantities of nitrogen and phosphorus from farm fertilizers and stormwater runoff to drain directly into rivers and streams. And last week, their River Friendly webinar focused on harmful algal blooms. And so I encourage you to go look at and watch that very informative webinar. But as you can see, groundwater and surface water, they're not separate resources. When our activities use one of these resources, it often affects the other in a relatively short time frame in terms of both water quantity and water quality. So in fact, all water is interconnected and has value. Drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, all should be managed in a sustainable, inclusive, and integrated way. Every aspect of consumption, from tomatoes to a new car, includes a water footprint. And none of our foundational systems, food, energy, transportation, can be isolated from the others. The One Water approach takes a holistic view of a community's multiple water resources and integrates each piece. And this is going to be really important as we develop climate change adaptation plans for communities going forward. This may be a very familiar slide or map to many of you. It shows the increase in heavy precipitation events over the last 50 years. Climate change increases the frequency and intensity of heavy rainfall. And you may have heard that 2018 was the wettest year on record in New Jersey, but this precipitation is in the form of intense storms. And this form of rainfall really isn't so good for our water resources, quantity or quality. When lots of rain falls in a short period of time, much of that water runs off before it can be absorbed into the soil. And extreme precipitation events have been linked to increased levels of pathogens in treated drinking water. And groundwater wells receive very limited water treatment. And this makes them much more susceptible to water contamination from these extreme weather events. and increases the risk of waterborne illnesses. So we as a society tend to be reactionary when it comes to water, whether it's dealing with destructive flooding or drinking water contamination, as we've seen in Flint and Newark and elsewhere with lead. But water scarcity is a silent emergency. It really results in little policy intervention. And water scarcity isn't an issue that's solely facing arid climates. It's not just the Middle East or the Midwest that are facing decreasing water supply. There's an interesting case history in Ipswich, Massachusetts. You may have heard of Ipswich clams, same place. And their excessive municipal withdrawals have caused the Ipswich River to run dry in the summer. And they've launched a number of water conservation campaigns up there to try to get the public to reduce water consumption. So as you can see, it is in the Northeast as well. Even though we get so much rain and sometimes it never seems to stop raining, we can still have water scarcity issues. Overpumping of groundwater can also cause land subsidence, which is a gradual settling or sudden sinking of the Earth's surface. So this gentleman here standing next to this pole, you can see that back in 1925, way at the top, the ground level was much higher than it was in 1977 when this photograph was taken. And more than 80% of the subsidence in the US is related to the withdrawal of groundwater. Groundwater depletion can also result in saltwater intrusion. So at the coast, under natural conditions, there's a boundary between freshwater and saltwater that tends to be pretty stable, but pumping can cause the saltwater to migrate inland and result in saltwater contamination of the water supply. So while groundwater is pumped from an aquifer, it can also result in surface water of poorer quality being drawn down into the aquifer, which can degrade water quality as well. Changes in subsurface pressure can actually suck arsenic out of layers of clay and into groundwater, like a sponge being squeezed. There's research on that being conducted at Stanford University. It's pretty interesting. So, growing lettuce in a desert is unsustainable, and we really have to move towards smart solutions. Certainly protecting our forests, our water storage areas is definitely a big part of that. Updating outdated management plans to better reflect water availability and climate change and storm intensity is also a huge part of that. So here's a map of domestic water use in gallons per day per person and the percent population growth in those states. And many of the states that have projected population growth increases also have higher per capita water use and can expect increased competition for water resources. Using water more efficiently is extremely important and helps maintain supplies at safe levels, protecting both human health and the environment. So how do we do this? How do we do this at home? Well, so this chart on the left here kind of gives an outline or overview of where we're using water in our homes. Certainly just at the shower and in the bathroom, we're using almost half. So these are kind of easy targets to try to reduce our water consumption at home. So we can, just a few things, and the internet abounds with tips on how to conserve water. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them here for time's sake. But installing water and energy efficient appliances and low flow toilets is a huge help. And not only does it save water, but also electricity. And if you're like me and you have a teenager at home, it may just mean that you still have a hot shower at the end of the day. So these are all great benefits. Fixing the leaks, we're home now. We have no excuse. So we can fix the leaks in our homes and save water that way. An easy one, turning off the tap, while you're shaving or brushing your teeth. Shorter showers. The 4-minute shower challenge is again, you get to the end of the night and you have a warm shower because everyone hasn't taken 15-minute showers throughout the day. That's an easy way. Raising your mower blades when you're mowing your lawn at home. Longer grass, keeping your grass a little bit longer can help to save water. Installing rain barrel, green infrastructure. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but these are excellent ways to protect both water quality and water quantity. Isn't that a sight for sore eyes? So green infrastructure can help preserve, again, water quality and water quantity. And also photos of rain gardens, as we see here, can improve pretty much any PowerPoint presentation. And so green infrastructure like this rain garden here can help to slow down and filter stormwater, allowing it to percolate and recharge the groundwater. When rain hits the rooftop and parking lots instead of wetlands, forests, and grasslands, it tends to run into storm drains that are directly connected to our waterways. So I encourage you to check out also the Green Infrastructure Champions program at Rutgers. Another way is to get involved with your local green team or environmental commission and to get out and be active in your community. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sources of groundwater contamination. Most of us live downhill or downgrade from somewhere or someone, and there are a number of factors that contribute to groundwater contamination that may affect our water supply. While some contaminants are naturally occurring, such as arsenic and radionuclides like uranium and radium, the majority of groundwater contamination is the result of human activity. Groundwater is susceptible to both point source and non-point source pollutants. So stormwater runoff, road salts, industry, agriculture, mismanaged manure lots, landfills, septic systems. And so complicating this further, actually, natural contaminants can actually be mobilized by man-made contaminants. So it does get kind of complicated. But are we at all protected? Yes, yeah. So people started to get pretty fed up with how bad their water was back in the 60s and 70s, and it was making people sick. And so they demanded change, and the Safe Drinking Water Act was born, drafted in 1974, and then some very important amendments in 1986 and 1996. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires periodic testing of community water supplies for a number of different contaminants. It set enforceable national health-based standards for drinking water to protect against man-made and naturally occurring contaminants. It requires public notification of violations and that residents on public water receive annual water quality reports. And very importantly, it also includes provisions for source water protection. In case you're wondering, this is Smiley the Water Tower in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and I love that, so I included that here. Unfortunately, though, the Safe Drinking Water Act does not protect private well owners. This is just for community or public water utilities. So for private well owners, it's up to each individual homeowner to maintain their well and to monitor their own water quality. There's a great resource online, the Private Well Class, which is a collaboration between the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, or RCAP, and the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, with funding from the US EPA. So this website has some great webinars and resources for learning more about private wells, learning how to maintain a private well. There's a lot to discuss here, but essentially, if you have a private well, you're very familiar with this image on the left. You have one of these in your yard, so you can see the well casing sticking up out of the ground and the blue well cap on top, and then so that casing extends down into the aquifer below, and there's a pump down there, and that pumps water into the home, into the well tank, and then that water goes up, is pumped up into the faucets in the home. So just some main points about taking care of your well. There are just a couple basics, right? So again, so there's a lot to learn here, but you want to make sure that your wellhead is sealed. So that blue cap in that last picture, there's a seal in that well cap. If that's not intact, it can let surface water contaminants into the well. So that's an important thing to maintain, to make sure that's intact. Make sure that flood water is not getting into the well. And check for any nearby sources of pollution. So, you know, your septic tank nearby. You want to make sure your septic tank is far from the well. There are regulations for that now, but you want to make sure that you're pumping that septic every 3 years. That's really, really important, right? We have 2 holes in our yards out here in the country. One is your well and the other is a septic tank, and you don't want those two to meet. You want to make sure that you're maintaining both of them to protect your health. Chemical storage, underground fuel storage tanks. If there are any leaking tanks in the yard, that can result in contamination of the well. And really the big thing is to make sure that you're testing your well water at least once a year for bacteria and nitrate, and then treating if necessary if you find contamination there. I'd also like to add that keeping well records is really helpful and important. So keep, you know, your well test results. Keep your information from when your well was drilled. That could be really helpful in the future, and to avoid silly mistakes like building a deck or putting a sidewalk in, you know, over a buried wellhead, things like that. And if you don't have well records right now and you have a well, there are some resources for you to find some information out about your well. You can either contact the health department. I know Hunterdon Health Department. You can fill out a simple form and request your well record. If you don't know the depth or you don't know, you know, what the test results looked like before you moved in, these are some things that you can find out by getting those records. Also, the Division of Water Supply and Geoscience, the Bureau of Water Allocation and Well Permitting is also another way to get access to records for your well. So private wells in New Jersey. Well, we have about 1.2 million people on private well in New Jersey. That's roughly 13% of the population. And that's about 400,000 private wells in the state. But in the more rural areas, like in the Upper Raritan, where I am now, it's really 4 out of 5 residents who are relying on private wells for their water supply. And again, there are no federal regulations that cover private wells. Homeowners are largely on their own. And before 2002, state regulations applied only to newly constructed wells. So a really important step in protecting private well owners and their health came in the form of the Private Well Testing Act, which became effective in September of 2002. And this is a consumer information law, a right to know law, that requires the sellers or the buyers, the law doesn't necessarily tell you which one it has to be. It requires that the well be tested and the results be shared with the buyer of the property at or before closing. And so this includes many different parameters that are required and really fall in line with the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations. Landlords are also required to test their well water once every 5 years and to provide each tenant with a copy of the test results. So again, this is a huge step in protecting the health of rural residents who are relying on well water. No remediation action is required under the state law. So really it's just, again, it's a right to know law. You have to provide those results to the buyer so they kind of know what they're getting into. And then if any remediation or treatment is necessary, that just becomes a point of negotiation for the sale of the home. So again, there are a number of contaminants that are required. They're pretty uniform around the state. There are a couple of exceptions. county to county. So in the northern counties, uranium is required, whereas they're not in the southern part of the state, and vice versa. Mercury is required in the southern part of the state in the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer, but mercury is not required in the northern part of the state. It's just not really an issue up here, as much of an issue as it is down there. And again, this is for, for home sales. So these tests are required when you sell your home. And approximately 20 to 25% of the wells in the state have been tested under this program. So there's still, since 2002 when it was established, so there's still a gap where homeowners maybe aren't necessarily testing, especially if they moved in before 2002. And that's really where community programs come in. So we've been hearing a lot about testing lately. We can't see viruses with the naked eye, and you can't see most water contaminants with the naked eye either. We really rely on science and on lab results for data that helps us to make decisions about our health. So water and testing is very important for this reason. And every year, well owners should test their wells for bacteria and nitrate at least. But it's really important, to test for the right things to make the most informed decisions. While you may be able to pick up a free test kit at Home Depot, is it going to provide you with information you need to protect your health? Yeah, unfortunately, no. So it won't really tell you anything particularly useful other than maybe pH and hardness, which are two secondary or largely non-health threatening contaminants, and you may just end up going home with an expensive water softener and not much else. So to encourage testing and to educate our well owners, RHA, Raritan Headwaters, established the well testing program back in the 70s to enable residents to test their well water and enable us to monitor groundwater quality in the watershed. And we partner with municipalities throughout the region to offer residents the opportunity to test their water. And we serve anywhere from 12 to 1,500 wells annually throughout the watershed and beyond. We also run the well testing program year-round through our two offices in Flemington and Bedminster. But if you're far outside our watershed, check with your local health department to find out about testing programs in your area. Other watershed organizations also offer some form of testing, so reach out to them as well. And you may also contact a private lab directly to arrange for testing, but this may cost more they may not be quite as helpful as some of the organizations that are doing testing in your area. So what should you, I add this slide at the last minute because there's some exciting new actions added to Sustainable Jersey. I don't know if we have many Green Team members here today, but I'd like to just mention for all those involved with your municipality or local Green Team, and you participate in the Sustainable Jersey program, that 2 new actions have been developed by the Sustainable Jersey Water Gold Task Force on outreach to promote regular well testing and awarding points to municipalities that actively educate, promote, and possibly even require well testing. And here's a link to more information. That link has an excellent list of resources for private well owners. You can get a lot of information by checking out the website there. And also the removing lead in drinking water action, I mentioned that. So lead testing is also very important, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But both of these are new actions that you can explore on the Sustainable Jersey website. So what are we testing for? So just an overview of the common contaminants that we encourage testing for. So the basic kit of water quality indicators includes coliform bacteria and E. coli and nitrates. And so these may raise a red flag for any potential structural issues with the well, any flood water getting into the well, surface water contamination. So these are very important to do annually. Then we have some common metals found in groundwater, iron and manganese, which are secondary contaminants, meaning they're really more of an aesthetic concern than a health issue. Arsenic, naturally occurring. I'm going to talk a little bit more about arsenic. That's a carcinogen. We definitely want to get that out if we find it. Lead, which is largely a pipe issue, and I'll talk more about that as well. Man-made, introduced pollutants, pesticides, volatile organic compounds, and then some other naturally occurring ones, the radionuclides. Gross alpha, which is a screen for uranium and radium, and also radon. And so what do we mean when we say too much, right? We've got too much of something. Well, the Safe Drinking Water Act set maximum contaminant levels for these contaminants, these parameters. And so that's what we're comparing levels to when we look at test results. Coliform, you don't want any, so the maximum contaminant level is 0 or absent. Lead is 15 micrograms per liter. Arsenic 5 micrograms per liter in New Jersey. It is 10 micrograms per liter at the federal level, and then nitrate 10 milligrams per liter. Gross alpha 15 picocuries per liter, iron and manganese. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about individual contaminants, the big ones here. So coliform bacteria and E. coli, and I mentioned earlier that we're going to see more heavy rain events with climate change, right? That's what's expected. And so this can lead to increases in pathogen loads and contamination of wells. And we have seen an increase in percentage or failure rates for coliform bacteria through our testing over the last few years. And, again, this can indicate problems, structural problems with the well cap or the casing. Whenever work is done on a well, that can introduce surface contaminants like coliform into the well. So if there's work done on a well, the well has to be chlorinated or sterilized afterward. Shallow wells tend to have are more susceptible to coliform bacteria and E. coli contamination. And then again, septic systems or animal waste close to the well can contribute to bacteria getting into the well. And you can see the map on the left is the outline of the Upper Raritan watershed, if you're not familiar with that shape. And the green dots there are all wells that were tested for coliform bacteria and did not have coliform present. And then the red dots are wells that do. So it's widespread. There are no kind of hot spots for coliform. It's really case by case, well by well. And again, it's very important to test every year for that. Nitrates, the second test in that basic kit. Excessive levels of nitrate can cause shortness of breath. It can result in blue baby syndrome in bottle-fed infants. It can definitely more dangerous for infants and pregnant women. And it can actually make metals such as uranium and mercury more soluble, so it can lead to contamination from those as well. So nitrate sources would be, again, septic systems, animal waste, fertilizers. There is a natural background level of nitrate in the groundwater just from natural biological processes. But when we get over about 4 milligrams per liter, we're looking at the possibility of contamination or influence from human sources. The maximum contaminant level is again 10 milligrams per liter. And we don't see many exceedances of that maximum in our watershed or the state. It's only about 2 to 3% of the wells that have been tested. but we definitely see higher levels of failures, maybe out in the Midwest in the Corn Belt, where they're using a lot more nitrate fertilizers. But it can affect others' natural systems and the balance of ecology and freshwater systems. So not just human health, it has other impacts as well. Here's a map of the entire state. You can see in the red there with much higher nitrogen input levels in the Corn Belt there, how you have much higher vulnerability in the aquifers to contamination from nitrate. But way over in New Jersey, you can see that we're not out of the woods there. So it's definitely something that we want to keep an eye on. And with increased septic density, that you have to be careful that we're not letting it get too high. Arsenic is another very common contaminant in the state. Really more common where we are in Hunterdon, where I am right now in Hunterdon County, and in the Piedmont region, which I don't know if you can see my cursor, maybe not. So the highlands at the top. Oh, so in the green stripe that comes along in the little key in the top there, you can see Piedmont region there, and that's really where we tend to see higher levels of arsenic, and it concentrates in the municipalities that are along the western edge of the state in the Piedmont, so particularly high in Kingwood Township, Alexandria Township, East Amwell. We see failures as high as 40% of the wells that have been tested in those areas. Statewide, it's about 8% failure rate, and then in the Piedmont, as a whole, it's about 17%. But again, it tends to concentrate in certain municipalities, and so arsenic is naturally occurring. And there's a picture here of an outcrop with the black shale between red beds and the Passaic Formation right here in Flemington. And arsenic is mobilized from that bedrock and the fractures that you see in the diagram below that. And that's how it can travel with the groundwater and into wells. Here's an image of the data that we've collected in our watershed. And again, you can see how it concentrates. The red dots are where a well has failed for the New Jersey arsenic standard of 5 parts per billion or 5 micrograms per liter. And you can see how it's definitely more prevalent in the Piedmont region as opposed to the Highlands, which is north of that. And I mentioned the Private Well Testing Act. They have a great resource online where they've published these interactive maps where you can explore the results of the Private Well Testing Act. All of the data from the wells that have been tested for home sales go to the DEP, and they compile that data, and they've put these maps together that you can explore. And so they're published in these grids to protect everyone's privacy. Private well test results are private, and we don't share those results, and the DEP doesn't share the results for particular homes either. So they've released the information in these grids where you can see the concentrations of failures or exceedances in the different squares. So obviously the dark blue would be higher levels of exceedances, and the yellow or the light green would be less. You can put your address into this site and check out your little 2x2 mile square and see what contaminants are prevalent in your area. So this is a great resource to explore. Arsenic's effects on the human body, it really leaves basically no system unscathed. It affects the nervous system, cardiovascular system. It's been linked to diabetes and heart attacks and cancers. So we really don't want to mess with arsenic. And the goal for arsenic is 0. So what's called a maximum contaminant level goal. And there are treatment systems to filter out arsenic, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end. Radionuclides also naturally occurring. So 4% of the 734 wells tested in the Raritan region since 2012 have exceeded the gross alpha standard of 15 picocuries per liter. But actually statewide, it's the most prevalent contaminant. It's higher than 10%, it's actually close to 11% of the wells in the state have failed to meet the standard. So that's a very important one to test for at least once. And radon as well. And so we don't actually have a standard set for radon in New Jersey, but the EPA action standard is 4,000 picocuries per liter. We've found levels of radon through our testing up to 85,000 picocuries per liter. So there are definitely some hot spots. And if you look at this map here, you can see that northern New Jersey has high radon potential throughout northern New Jersey. Here's a really boring slide, volatile organic compounds. We test for these as well. It's important to test for VOCs every 5 years or so, and particularly if you live in more developed areas. If you're near a gas station or a dry cleaner, these can be more of an issue. We recently did testing in Bridgewater last year and discovered a few wells in one neighborhood which had high levels of trichloroethylene or TCE, which they weren't aware of. And so once you've tested, and if you do find one or more of these compounds, there is treatment available. So again, testing is really important to identify any issues. For these VOCs, granular activated carbon filters have been successful in removing them. And statewide, only 1.2% of the wells tested have contained at least one VOC in concentrations above the corresponding drinking water standard. Some of the common ones that we find, and the reason they're highlighted in red here, would be chloroform and dibromochloromethane. These are disinfection byproducts. So most people think about being like knocked out in the movies, with chloroform, but it's actually one of the trihalomethanes that's formed when chlorine or other disinfectants are used to treat drinking water. So that's kind of one of the more common ones that we find in groundwater here. So lead's a big issue, and it's not just in the city, and it's not just low-income communities that have lead issues, right? This is really has to do more about the age of a home than anything else. So in the year 1986, the Safe Drinking Water Act amendments defined lead-free plumbing. And so we encourage, which put stricter standards on how much lead was allowed in plumbing products. So we encourage anyone living in a home built before 1986 or 1987 to test for lead. And again, this is a pipe issue. So, it could be lead leaching from the pipes or the solder that's holding, say copper pipes together. That's where the lead is coming from. So it's a cumulative toxicant. So it affects multiple body systems and it accumulates in the body, and it's particularly harmful to young children. It's distributed in the brain and the liver and the kidney and the bones, and it's stored in the teeth and bones where it can accumulate over time. And then lead in bone can be released into the blood during pregnancy and become a source of exposure to the developing fetus. And it's not that hard to test for, and it's really pretty easy to treat if you find it. So there are simple, kind of relatively inexpensive faucet mount filters that can be put on the kitchen sink that would reduce your lead exposure. If you know that it's there, even just in the short term, running the water in the morning to flush out the pipes can reduce your exposure to lead. So really, it's about raising awareness to the potential of this issue and letting people know how they can test for it and what they can do about it. Even a lot of the easy to find pitcher filters can can filter out lead. You do want to make sure that it's certified to remove lead. The National Sanitation Foundation certifies products to let you know that it's going to be effective for that. And this test is important for both well owners and public water users, right? So there we go. So the responsibility of the purveyor, the public water purveyor, really ends at the property line. All the pipes inside the house, any lead that may be leaching from those, it's the responsibility of the homeowner to identify if there's an issue there. So we do encourage, both those residents on private well as well as those on public water to do a lead test at the kitchen sink. Our first draw of the test is best. So, water that's sitting in the pipes overnight, that's what you want to test. Some emerging contaminants of concern that we're looking into as well, and that will be added to the Private Well Testing Act. We've got new standards for in New Jersey, the PFAS, and you've probably seen or heard about these in the news. These are perfluoroalkyl substances. You have PFAS in your blood, as do virtually all Americans. This group contains several categories and classes of durable chemicals and materials with properties that include oil, water, temperature, chemical, and fire resistance. So firefighting foams, military training facilities are hotspots for these. They're no longer in use, but these are called forever chemicals for a reason. They're very persistent in groundwater. They stick around for a long, long time, and they can move, in plumes. And there has been some contamination identified in our watershed and throughout New Jersey. So. This is something that, while it's an expensive test, would be important to do, at least one PFAS test at some point on your well water. There is treatment available for these as well. Granular activated carbon can take out PFAS with some success. So New Jersey is again finally adopting some tough new health standards for two of the PFAS chemicals, PFOA and PFOS, and they'll be two of the strictest standards in the U.S., far stronger than the 70 part per trillion advisory guidelines set by the EPA. So PFOA in New Jersey, the MCL will be set at 14 parts per trillion, and PFOS, the MCL, will be set at 13 parts per trillion. MCL meaning maximum contaminant level. So, again, there are treatment options available if you find contaminants in your water. Testing is the first step, but certainly there's treatment for almost everything that we test for. One of the ways you can treat is just to manage the sources, right? So for coliform bacteria and E. coli, if you find bacteria in the well, you may have to disinfect the well or shock the well. It may require repairs to your wells, the casing or the well cap. And then for nitrates, one of the best kind of ways, or one of the first ways you want to tackle that, would be to find and eliminate the source. Excess fertilizers, again, having your septic system pumped, these are ways that you can manage sources of contamination. And then there's point of use filtration, which is something that goes under your kitchen sink, right? So a filter that attaches to a single tap. This may also include, the faucet attachments that I spoke of about for lead, and maybe even would include the pitcher filters. So reverse osmosis are a common type of point of use filtration, and they're very effective at removing a whole slew of different contaminants that you may find in your well water. And then there's also point of entry filtration. So these are whole house filters that are installed where the water comes into the home. So, near the well tank. And this treats every single faucet in the house. And so these systems are very effective. Arsenic treatment systems are often point of entry filtration systems. So these big granular ferric adsorption systems, which treat arsenic, are a type of point of entry filtration. So there are options available. And again, finding out what's in it is the first step. So test, and then you can tackle what you may, and you may find that your water is perfectly great, and you may not find any contaminants. And certainly we want to encourage residents to test for that reason too. A lot of people rely on bottled water unnecessarily. So if we can encourage residents to do testing, perhaps we can reduce the amount of bottled water being used. And if you put filter systems on in your home, I mean, this little RO system in the middle picture is like having a little mini bottling plant right under your kitchen sink, and it can be very effective. And that's it. Oh my goodness, 12:55. Did I make it to the end without? I got everything in. I'm so excited. So I think if someone wants to take over for me, I'd stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you so much, Mara. That was so much good information.
Okay, thank you. I think, okay, good. We're back on track.
I'm not seeing any questions. You did such a good job going over everything. Doesn't look like anyone has any questions right now. I think we will be sharing your slides, if that's okay with you, Mary, as well as the recording with everyone. And we'll share some links and other follow-up information. Heidi says, great job, Mara.
Thanks, Heidi.
So yeah, if anyone has any questions that you didn't think of now that kind of pop up later, you can send me an email. I'm the one that sent you the link for this presentation, so you know how to get in touch with me. And oops, okay, Sarah has a question. You told us where we can find info about our well condition. Where can we find information about our septic to ensure it is not a problem?
Well, your health department is a great resource for information about septics, and certainly one of the septic companies that does pumping. More often than not, they do inspections as well. So if you need an inspection on your septic, you can contact a local septic company, and they'll help you with that. But the health department is who to call if you have questions about your septic. I mean, if you want more information about how to take care of your septic, Raritan Headwaters actually has a post recently on the resource hub if you want to learn more about septics. That's another place you could visit. So, thank you, Skip. Yes.
Everybody. Great.
I went through a lot. So I'm wondering, does anybody have any pressing questions? What's that smell in my water? Maybe you drink bottled water because you don't trust your well water. That's curious. I like to convince people to test and drink their own well water. Oh, sure. Yes. Shout out to Sustainable Jersey. Yes. Well, thank you. I mean, the new actions to encourage testing are excellent, and we're excited to see that and to encourage lead testing and well testing. So, yeah.
Okay. Mary, you're seeing the chat, I guess, right? You're seeing.
Well, they're seeing like as they pop up.
Okay. Looks like Anne also asked, will the PFOs be included in the PWTA?
Yes, they are expected to. They were expected to actually last year, but I think they were pushed off a little bit. But yes, they are expected to fall in line with the standards for public water supplies as well. Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Hope to see you next week, and we'll send you information. Thank you so much, Mara. That was great.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye, everyone.